All right, so now I'm in presentation mode. Hopefully you guys still see slides, and hopefully this is scaling okay. What I wanted to talk about here is something that I find very interesting, and that is turning command line tools into PowerShell tools. My chapter contribution to the PowerShell Deep Dives book is on this topic, and so I thought it would be kind of cool to talk a little bit about this topic and kind of reference some information that's in the book. So when you get to reading the book and you get to my chapter, you'll read through and go, oh yeah, I saw that, and I see now what he's talking about. So this is a little preview of what will come in the book. So the problem that we have, well, and maybe not necessarily a problem, but the issue is, we all know that PowerShell is all about objects. And we want to use those objects in the pipeline to be the most efficient, do the most coolest, wonderful things that we can. Even though it's still it's already 2013, and we have a lot more PowerShell than we did even a couple of years ago, there are still new products and things that are coming in that are PowerShell related, but there's still a lot of things that we may still do that don't have a PowerShell solution. Typically, we fall back to legacy command line tools. You may have a favorite Windows command line tool or resource kit tool, or perhaps something from a vendor, some command line tool that does something that you need to do, but there's no PowerShell equivalent yet for that. So what we want to be able to do is turn those command line tools into PowerShell tools. In other words, take a command line tool, like Ip Config, for example, it could be any command line tool, turn into something that runs in PowerShell, and we get objects that we can work with in the pipeline. So that's really the challenge here, and that's kind of the premise for my talk and some things I want to go over. Now, there are some requirements here. The tool that you are going to be using, but that you want to deal with or turn into a PowerShell tool, needs to use standard out. There are some people who will write command line tools, they do funky things in how they write output. It has to do standard out. If you can't type the command and redirect it using the legacy redirection output, it's probably really not going to work in PowerShell. Ideally, your command line tools should offer predictable or formatted output, something so that no matter what I do when I run this command, or this command with this particular set of switches, I'll always have the same type of output. If the command is going to generate output that's going to vary depending upon time of day or phase of the moon or whatever, it's going to be much, much harder to turn that into a PowerShell tool. So we want something that's predictable or something that has output that is structured, formatted. We need to avoid interactive tools like Nutshell, anything where you have to go into an interactive prompt. Disk part would be another example, unless those two is to use your own header. A lot of the CSV commandlets in PowerShell have an option so that you can specify a substitute header, and that's one way of getting around the property names that have spaces. Parsing text. I'm basically going to go through all my slides and we'll get to the demonstrations. A common technique you might need to do is using select object to skip a number of lines. This is where it helps to know what the structured format of your command line tool is. So maybe the data that I want to get, starts at line 5. So I'm going to run my command, pipe to select object, and skip the first 5 lines, 6 lines or whatever it is. Typically then I might need to take each of those lines and split each of those lines into an array. Again, hopefully if the line is structured in such a way with some delimiter such as an equal sign or a colon, something that you can find a way to split the line into an array, then you can work with the individual components of that line. Or, actually I guess I should say, you may also need to use the substring method. Maybe I can split part of it, and then I need to use substring to get the further part. You'll become, if you work with this, you'll become really good at select object, splitting, and substring. For really complex cases, regular expressions really are invaluable. Now, they don't have to be really complex regular expressions. I have some examples that are really simple, but if you know a little regular expression, that will help you quite a bit. And then last thing, I found this very useful, just to, I guess more of a being a habit of this sort of thing. The string object has a trim method, which will remove both leading and trailing spaces. I always trim my parts. That way I make sure I don't have any extraneous spaces in property names or in whatever data that I happen to pull. So these are kind of the techniques that I follow when I get to having to parse the text. And then finally, we need to create objects from that command output. Usually I'll create a hash table of properties. In PowerShell version 3, I can make that now an ordered hash table, which is really nice. I'll then create that object with new object, or again in PowerShell version 3, I could use PS custom object. As an optional feature, and this is something I've just started playing with recently, you could continue to build on your output and use add member and add additional properties that maybe have nothing to do with the command output, but maybe something that is tangential, or maybe you want to add a method to the object that maybe ties into the data that you pulled from the command line tool. I have an example here. Hopefully we'll have time that you can see that. So you can create a full rich object from the command line output plus whatever else you want to tack on. All right, so that's it for the slides. We'll go in and look at the demos. Everything I'm going to show you will make available somewhere. Again, focus on the techniques and the examples, what I'm doing, not necessarily the commands that I'm turning into PowerShell tools, because they're really not that compelling. They're more as an illustration than anything. All right, so I'm going to switch over and see if I can get this to switch and share to the ISE here. So let me, everyone see you guys see the PowerShell ISE here on the screen?
Yeah, it's coming through now.
Okay.
All right, it looks good.
All right, so I'm going to start off here with my driver query demo. So I'm just going to I've got the IC here, just so it's easier, I don't have to type, I can just highlight a line and run it. So let me clear the screen here. So in the command line tool, if you run driver, you get a nice little output like that shows you the driver, what type it is, and when it was installed. If you look at help for driver query, which is something obviously you'll need to do for any command line tool, look at the help. I can see some here. I can see how to connect to machines and whatnot, but more importantly, I can see there's an option for format, and I can make it a CSV. I can even specify not to show the column header. Lots of good information there. So once I know that, I can say I'm going to run driver query, formatting as CSV, and then I'm just going to select the first 5. See here. So there is this first line here. There's the header line. And then here are the objects. Now if someone's trying to text me, I can't answer because I'm in full screen here. So what I can do now that I see what the output is, let's just run that command and pipe it to convert from CSV and save the result to the variable drivers. If we look at $drivers, well, let's just look at the first couple. So there we go. Just like that, I now have PowerShell. They're custom objects, but they work. Now the property names here have spaces, but maybe that doesn't bother too much.
Hey,
but I can, yeah?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
Can you slow down a little bit on the screen switching? Okay. It takes time to catch up.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Sorry about that. I get so excited. I want you to see all this all at once. So we've got objects, which means if I wanted to, I could say take all those drivers and group them by type, by that driver type. Now I have to put that property, because it has spaces, in quotes. So you see I've got 268 kernel and 29 file system. Or I could say get all the drivers where the driver type matches file, and then sort. Now, here the link date property is just a string. Anytime you're working with converting from CSV or to CSV, everything is a string. So I'm going to use the little trick here with sort object and create basically a custom property or a custom value that's going to treat the link date as date time. So when I run this command, now I get all my file system drivers, and they are sorted by link date as true date time objects. Now, I don't really like those spaces in property names, so I create my own header. So I'm going to basically rerun this command of getting the drivers with the no header, format as CSV. I'm going to convert this from CSV, but now I'm going to specify my own header. Now that I know what order that CSV is always going to be in, I can basically use module name, display name, type, and link date for my new headers. Driver 0, let's look at the first couple ones. There we go. So now I have my objects. To get member. Again, notice that these are all strings. But I could do the same thing in terms of the sort, or I could take $drivers, pipe it to out grid view, and basically I have output. So this driver query is kind of cool. If I wanted to, I could go back to the help and build a little, function, taking the parameters for driver query and passing them and running it, and then piping the output to convert from CSV, adding my header, and now I have objects that I could then do whatever I want to with them. So that's one example. That's kind of great. If you can find something that uses a CSV format, you're golden. Usually. Here, let me show you another example where that doesn't quite work. Schedule tasks, the old schedule tasks.exe that we used to have to use. Let me clear the screen back there. All right, so if I look at help for schedule tasks on query, again, you can see there are options to specify a format list, no header. Works a lot like driver query. So it looks like I should be able to do basically the same type of thing. Do my schedule tasks query, format as CSV, convert from CSV. In this case, I'm just going to select the first 20. All right, that kind of looks like it worked. There's my header, task name, next runtime status. Those all look good. But then look down here. Here's task name, next runtime, and status. Schedule tasks, the command line tool, the way that it works, when it makes its query, it actually will generate multiple CSV outputs. So you'll end up, if I had looked at everything, I would see this task name next runtime status multiple times. So that's not really going to work for me. So what I need to do is I need to parse the output. So I have a little PowerShell script that I turn into a function called getMyScheduleTask. So here's an example here of taking a command line tool and wrapping it into some PowerShell and creating a PowerShell tool. So this connects to the local computer by default, although because schedule task allows you to query remote computer, you can specify remote computer, and the verbose detail is for the /v that you can do on scheduled tasks. I define an empty hash table. I get my command data, and I format it as a list. What I end up doing then is going through and parsing the list output and build a hash table, and then parsing each line and then getting the substring. Probably what I need to show you here is what it looks like. All right, so that's going to run. Sorry, well, let's just let that finish. So you can see each task list, each scheduled task has host name, task name, next runtime, status, logon. That's what I am parsing, and there's a blank line between each one. So that's where this first part here is matching, looking for that blank line. That tells me I am going to start a next set of lines to parse. And I parse each of those objects, each of those lines, and get using the last index of to find basically where this is, that colon, and then I get the value, and then I pull out spaces for the property names, and then add that hash table, add the property name, which I have pulled from here, pulling out any spaces, and then the value is what ends up on this side. Now, I just found a little glitch here. There are some times where scheduled tasks will show this info line. So if that happens, it gets added to the hash table, but then I go ahead and just delete that. Or if you wanted to, you could update that. When it's all done, I then create my object from the hash table. So let me load that function. And I'm going to run this with -verbose, which is -verbose for the function. So the verbose, so we'll look at this last one here. So there's the start, which means it found the blank line. It's parsing the host name. It found Serenity, which is my computer name. It found the task name. It found the next runtime, the status, and logon mode. Now, this is not using ordered hash tables, so the order can be a little bit different when I actually write it versus what this verbose parsing does. That's why they're not quite in the same order. But this is the actual output here. This is an actual object that's being written to the pipeline. So if I were actually even to do this, let's do this. So I run just that line. Oh, spelling still counts. There we go. So there is command line tool turned into a PowerShell tool. Took a little work to try to parse through and split up the lines, but it works. All right, let's see what else I got for you. Oh yeah, NBT stat. This is a good. All right, so let's turn this NBT stat. The NBT stat /n, showing my age here. All right, so I want to look at the NetBIOS local name table. In essence, I want to be able to take all of this information and turn this into a PowerShell object. So here is a good use of some parsing techniques. First off, I need to select just the lines that I want. So I know from looking at the output that I want only the lines that have this angled bracket in it. Anything else I can ignore. I just want all the lines that have an angle bracket. So I'm using select string, specifying that, and we'll save the variable to $data. So if I look at $data, there we go. So now I have just the data that I am interested in. Here's where trimming comes into play, though. I want to trim each of those lines. So I'm going to take $data, and for each line, I'm going to go ahead and trim it and then save the results. Because notice here I got spaces before and there's probably some spaces after. Now that I trimmed it, there's dollar lines. Getting better here. Now I want to split each line into an array and add each element to a hash table. So I'm going to take my lines, and for each one, I'm going to split it on the white space. And then I'm going to build a hash table. In this case, I'm going to use PowerShell version 3 and make an ordered hash table. And I know when I split this that the name will be item 0. The NBT code will be 1, the type will be 2, and the status will be 3. Basically the order that it's listed there on the screen. And then all I need to do is take each hash table and run that through new object to create a new custom object. So if I just run that block of code, there we go. So here are my custom objects that show me the name, NBT code, type, and status. I've got 4 custom objects, all built from a command line tool. But the trick was knowing how to find the data that you want and then being able to parse it. All right, let me go to this Ip Config. This is the demonstration, one of the demonstrations that I have in the chapter in the Deep Dives book. So let me show you how this works, kind of talk through what I wrote about here. So let's say we have this command ipconfig /display DNS. This shows you all of the DNS names that are recorded or at least cached in your system. And I want to be able to take this output, or most of this output anyway, and turn it into a PowerShell object. Because right now, everything that I see here is just a string. Now, ipconfig doesn't have any options to export data to a CSV format or anything like that. So I'm going to have to do just some plain old-fashioned brute force parsing. And I decided, first off, that I just want the lines that have record and a space in the name. So I'm going to get record name, record type, and this last line, which should have the IP address. So let's run $data equal IP config slash display DNS pipe to select string. All right, so there are kind of the entries that I am getting. Now, when I first looked at this, I realized, oh, I have objects, or basically groups, of 3. So I always have the record name, the record type, and then the record, which could be either a CNAME record or an A record. And then I repeat again, name, type, record, name, type, record, name, type, record. So I need a way of processing these strings in groups of 3. So using a for loop, so for I equals 0, as long as I'm done, for as long as there's data in $data, I'm going to, each time through, I'm going to increment by 3. And then I'm just going to display, just to test this here, the value of $I. So this should give me basically the first record name. All right, so that looks like that worked. I didn't end up with something other than record name. I should have gotten basically the first line. That's just really for testing. Now that I know that that idea works, now I can go through and build my objects from that. So I can go through and loop, and every time through the loop, I'm going to build an ordered hash table. And I'm going to take the line and split it, send it to a string, split it on the colon, and then trim. And then the address will be, so that's going to be for the name. I'm going to create something called type, which will take the next line. Notice I'm adding 1 to $I, splitting it, and I want to treat that as an integer. And then we'll do the same thing for the address. So that's how I'm going to get the index of $I plus 2. And I create a hash table and then create the new object. So, and then $I is incremented by 3 to jump to the next one. So when I run that block of code, I get output. So there's my name, there's the type, and this is now an integer, and there is the, so this is a CNAME and not an A name, but that's fine. And I can see the different types. I went ahead and turned this into a function called getIpConfig which works basically the way that I just described. Although I did make a few tweaks in here. I do have some right verbose information. I decided I also wanted to include the time property, which is in essence the time to live for the entry. So my data not only have that record space, but also anything that has the word time in the line. So now I'm grouping by 4s. Of course, I'm assuming that I'm not going to have anything funky in the output where time might be in the name somewhere, but I think I should be okay with that. Anyway, so I'm going to group by 4s. So the same type of thing that I did before, except I'm just doing it by 4s. So I'm doing the name, the type. I'm creating something called time to live, which is based on the time, which will be the third entry, and then the address, and then creating a new object. I also decided, you know what, because I have this IP information, maybe I want to be able to ping the address or run traceroute. So I went ahead and also, after I create my object, on each line from the hash table, I pipe that object to add member, and I'm adding a script method for ping, which is going to run test connection for the name property of whatever the object is, and then also trace, which will run the traceroute command line tool on the IP address. And then I finally write the object to the pipeline. So let me go ahead and load that function up. Let's clear the screen here. Let's go ahead and run the command, save the output to $D. Goes pretty quickly. And let's do this. Let's do pipe $D to get member. So you can see, here's my custom object. Here are my here are my script methods. That's what I was looking for. My properties and my script methods. But now I have data that I can work with in the pipeline. So let's say I want to find all of the IP sort by name and formatted table. Very handy. Or let's do this. Let's get all of my, I'll just rerun get Ip Config Dns, because I want to show you that, I want to be able to work with this tool in the pipeline. So this function, this is running the command line tool, but now it's a PowerShell tool. I want to get all the ones where type equals 1. I'm going to sort by name. I'm going to pipe it to out grid view with dash pass-through, which is new in PowerShell version 1. And then for every object that I click on and select, I'm going to run or invoke the ping method on that new object. So here are my entries, and I should be able to, let's select like LastPass and MS MVPs. It's always amazing when I look at this, go, where did that address come from? I don't remember going to that site. So now I have 2 there. If I click OK, and it will now pipe those objects, most custom objects I created, to the pipeline, and it's running the ping method that I added. So there's LastPass, and now I should be trying the other one here. And I'm not quite sure why I didn't do the last one, but you get the, I think you get the idea. So building command tools, or I'm sorry, building PowerShell tools from command line tools, I mean, in some ways it's a lot of fun. And we don't have to, well, maybe I'm reinventing the wheel here, but, there's no PowerShell tool to get the cached information. Maybe there's a .NET class. I'm not a .NET developer, so not a .NET type. So people say, oh, there's a .NET class. Well, I don't know that because I don't live .NET. I do PowerShell. So if I can find a way to take a tool that I know how to use and without a lot of work create a PowerShell tool based on that command line tool, sure, why not? So that's what I have ended up doing. How are we doing on time, Mike?
We're fine on time, Jeff.
Okay. Because I could show one more example if people want to see. Do you want to see another example, or?
Sure.
All right. So here's another example. We have the venerable net user command, which for the young folk in the audience, this was the way we used to do it. So I can run a command like net user administrator. So this is showing me the local administrator account on this particular computer. Now, wouldn't it be nice to have a lot of that information as an object? So what I'm going to do is run that command and filter out the blanks, and I'm going to filter out this last line where it says the command completed successfully. So we'll do that. $data now should just be the lines of text. And they are. I'm going to define a hash table to hold the values. If you are not comfortable with hash tables and you want to do this sort of thing, well, you will become comfortable with hash tables. Now, I decided that I didn't like all of these spaces, so it's a little ugly, but again, this is more technique than actual finished, perfect product. I'm going to take $data, and for each line, I'm going to split the parts, and I'm going to split. Now, here's the tricky part. I don't have any colons. I don't have anything really to delineate between the column on the left and the data on the right. So I took a gamble, and in this case it seems to work, and I'm using the expression pattern to do my split. I'm basically splitting on at least 2 blank white spaces, or 2 white spaces. I'm going to split on whatever space seems to be between these 2 columns. And then I can replace, so parts 0, which will be this line here, I'm going to replace the space with an underscore. So that's what I'm doing here. And then the value will be basically the index 1 of my parts, and I'm just going to then add each property and value to my hash table. So let's just the hash table real quickly. If I look at $hash, there we go. That looks like it seemed to work. And then, of course, all I need to do is create a new object with that hash table. I saved it to variable $u. There it is. So I was able to take command line output from NetUser and build a PowerShell put. Now that I have properties, I can, select, because it's PowerShell, so it's much easier to say, yeah, just show me the username, password properties, and the last logon. All right? So there's a little look at creating command line tools from PowerShell Tools. Let me go back to the slides here. Let's leave this here. So, questions, comments, does that look useful to anyone? Do I need to go back and look at, here, I'm going to stop sharing. No, I can't stop sharing. Will questions come via chat, or will people chime in?
Hey, if anybody's got a question, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, because otherwise I'm not going to bother looking at the link client.
Yeah, Jeff, it's Pat Richard. Are you going to make these these demo scripts available?
Oh yeah. I'll make a copy of the slide deck as a PDF and all of the examples, and they'll go somewhere. I'll let Mike. I don't know if they'll go on Mike's site or on my blog or both, but just watch on Twitter in the next day or so when someone will talk about where to get them.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if they're not on the Mississippi PowerShell User Group website, what we'll do is we'll put a link out there to where they are.
Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll make a post on my blog, and then I'll send that link to Mike, and then he can propagate and disperse it wherever he needs to. That work, Mike?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, because this is the kind of thing where you just kind of have to, you got to see it, and it's hard in, this type of setting, especially because things scroll by quickly or maybe too slowly or the screen doesn't refresh right. But once you see some of the things in action, it's much easier to learn, which is why I kind of came up with some of these examples. They're not necessarily, again, the most compelling examples, but it's all about the technique, really, more than anything. So questions on the technique, or does this look useful to anyone?
And if anybody doesn't have a microphone or prefers not to ask your question out loud, if you want to type it in the chat, I'll ask it to Jeff for you.
Oh, and while we're waiting, congratulations, Mike, on your victorious conquering of the scripting games.
Thank you very much.
I'd also be curious if someone is thinking of a command line tool that they are thinking, oh, yeah, I want to be able to take this and turn it into a PowerShell. I'd love to know what that tool is.
I know earlier me and Ron Edwards were talking about something unrelated. Did you want to ask a question to Jeff about that, Ron?
I guess not.
Okay, it looks like we're ready to do the giveaway. And I asked earlier in the chat if there was anybody who wanted to be excluded, and I did get one response. Is there anybody else who wants to be excluded from the giveaway? If you're, it looks like Ron did what I normally do. He forgot to unmute.
Yeah, I was talking to myself. I'll ask after the giveaway though.
There's I'm sure everybody can see it. There's Jeff Hicks' information of where to contact him, Twitter, his blog, his email address, as well as Google+. Jason Morgan asked a question. I guess he means, do you post your scripts in the Technet script repository?
I don't. I tend to, anything that I write, I tend to just post and host on my blog. That way I know I'll always have them. I mean, I suppose Technet's not going anywhere, but no, I don't post anything on Technet. I tend to just post everything on my blog. Assuming it's not something that I've written for one of the other places that I write for. So you'll find, for example, you'll find scripts of mine or code samples like on 4sysops or the Altero Hyper-V blog, sometimes on the Petri knowledge base, but most stuff that I write will be posted on my blog. And I tweet about it and on Google Plus and on the Facebook PowerShell page. And I'm available for bar mitzvahs, weddings, and any other PowerShell type training you might need.